There are some drawbacks to Bitcoin. However, that's where the majority liquidity is. But as investors, people are looking for the next opportunity, right? So in order to find the next opportunity, you have to stray away from Bitcoin, which is why I think we've seen the dominance continuing to fall. Even though right now it's at 50, I think that, over the course of the next bull run, going into the next cycle, might be at, 30, 20% as more people diversify into altcoins looking to, number one, make gains, but the number two, keep up with the technology, right? Because there's going to be new blockchains that come out that are going to do things better than Bitcoin, better than Ethereum, and even better than Cardano. Like we're at the very early stages. An analogy I like to use is you take a look at vehicles or cars. You take a look at the Model T 100 years ago, and you try to explain to somebody 100 years ago what a Tesla is now, they wouldn't be able to understand a car that can drive itself, a car that uses electricity instead of, a traditional combustion engine running off of gas, right? So I think it's going to be the same exact thing with crypto. Right now, all we know about is Bitcoin, Cardano, Ethereum, Avalanche, Polygon, etc. Imagine 100 years from now, where we've had time for trial and error to take place, where we've had time to create new blockchains that are able to do everything that we have now, plus 100 other things. So I think it's inevitable. We're going to see the liquidity drain out of Bitcoin, but kudos to anybody who was able to get into Bitcoin, right, to have that vision, because again, it was like the pioneer, right? Without Bitcoin, we wouldn't have everything else that we have now. But I think that as things mature, we do have to diversify and invest in new opportunities.
Hi, everyone. Today we have a esteemed guest. Farid, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. First and foremost, Hassan, thanks for having me on here. My name is Farid. I run the official DappCentral YouTube channel, breaking everything down when it comes to Cardano. So highlighting all the builders, all the updates, all the news, and providing tutorials surrounding all the platforms in the ecosystem.
Perfect. So to be honest, I was like a fan of Cardano, especially around like the last bull run, basically, or not the last one, maybe the one before, just around 2016, 2017, when Cardano was in early development. I was very interested in it, and I was following all the news. Right now, I'm a bit like unaware of the latest development. So can you give us like an overview of the background as well, in case someone who doesn't know about Cardano, and also like what is the latest developments?
Yeah, sure thing. So Cardano is one of the very few proof of stake blockchains, which has grown to the size that it has while still being able to maintain decentralization at its core, right? So Cardano has taken a very sort of rigorous approach to just developing the blockchain. It's backed by a lot of peer-reviewed research, and there has been 3 arms to basically find or to push Cardano out to the masses. So first, we've got IOG. Second, we've got the Cardano Foundation. And then third, we've got Emergo. They all tend to focus on different portions. So for example, Emergo focuses on adoption within like the African continent, as well as within Asia. IOG has taken a lot of the research. So they're developing the core technology and they're handing that off to the community as things are becoming finished. And then the Cardano Foundation is like kind of in the middle. They are working to get Cardano adopted. So they're in charge of, landing bigger partnerships, reaching out to the ecosystems, and incorporating Cardano in the conversation. Now, that said, Cardano's gone through a couple of stages. I believe right now we are in the Voltaire era, focusing on governance. One of the first eras was focused on decentralization, followed by smart contract adoption.
So basically, Cardano has like a master plan. So when they initiated, instead of just coming up with solutions as they go, they had like a specific stages in which to start. So Voltaire is basically the name of one of the stages. I think stage number 3 or 4, is it?
Yep, that is. I want to say there was Shelley, Gauguin, Byron, Voltaire, and there may be one more that I missed in there. Yeah, we're basically at the end of the Cardano roadmap, right? So I think you summed it up there very well. The team has been methodical about, how they want Cardano to be built out and deployed. And we're finally at the very end piece here with governance, where the Cardano community can finally step in, take advantage of being able to propose how they want the Cardano blockchain to be maintained going forward, dealing with, upgrades, parameters, anything you can think of. You could essentially come through, allow for the community to vote on that, and then based off of the decision, have that be actually implemented on the Cardano blockchain. So an exciting time to be in Cardano. And then I guess just when it comes to the state of just projects, I think there's over now 1,500 builders, 150 projects have officially launched. That ranges, from DEXs, which allow for you to swap in and out of tokens. We've got DeFi protocols allowing for you to lend and borrow, essentially being your own bank. We've got infrastructure platforms coming along as well, for example, like Charlie 3 and OrcFax providing Oracle feeds and price data. And then we've also even got DPIN project, which is now like the new narrative, right? So we've got World Mobile, we've got Empower. These are projects making a real world impact with people that may not have heard of crypto and blockchain before, but they're not being exposed to these projects, which are using blockchain technology or the blockchain stack in order to fuel their operations. So in a nutshell, that's Cardano and just kind of the state of things right now.
Perfect. So like last time I used the Cardano on chain, it was like slightly slow, like compared maybe to other projects, like it took about 5 minutes or so. Has this improved, or is there any other solutions for this like transactions on the blockchain?
That's a good question. And with governance around the corner, this will actually be something that the community could essentially vote for, right? So Cardano has taken an interesting approach when it comes to the speed. Right now, speed is at the top of mind, especially during times right now where there's a lot of people coming into the ecosystem, but a block is produced around every 20 seconds. For comparison's sake, I believe Bitcoin has a block produced around every 10 minutes. Ethereum is a little bit faster. However, there are some trade-offs, right? So the faster that you produce or mint blocks, the harder it is to, number one, be decentralized, but the number two, maintain that ledger because, again, it's being updated so quickly. The slower, the easier it is to manage the blockchain. But then, of course, from an end user's perspective, it's not necessarily ideal. So Cardano's kind of found the sweet spot there initially, with blocks being propagated about every 20 seconds or so, which, again, when you compare that to other networks, doesn't necessarily seem like it's the fastest. However, we are waiting on some scaling upgrades, right, to come down the pipe. So there's things, for example, like input endorsers, there's Hydra, just a lot of different things, for example, like even Mithril, which make it easier to, number one, interact with the blockchain, but the number two, to increase the scalability and the throughput when it comes to the network. So right now, Cardano is not in its final form just yet. So for anybody who has checked it out and sort of has some reserves surrounding the speed, keep in mind that there are scalability upgrades coming, especially once governance is out the door.
I think actually you are correct. Like for example, the block time is not very high compared to other crypto, but I think when I was talking about is like the confirmations, like compared to other cryptos, like maybe Bitcoin, people would be sufficiently satisfied with like a couple of confirmations. For Cardano, usually it's required like for any transaction, especially with exchanges, like you have to wait for like some time just to make sure that it's confirmed. So yeah, maybe I think with extra decentralization, I think this hopefully would be an issue of the past. So going back to the projects you mentioned, like there is a lot of obviously layer two now is exploding on Cardano. So do you also follow the NFT space in the Cardano or not really?
I am interested in some of the NFTs. There's always so many projects. I think with NFTs, the barrier to entry is a lot lower. So we tend to see a lot of those popping up much quicker than, for example, DeFi protocols, DEXs, infrastructure, et cetera, that I mentioned earlier. But I do tend to keep up with at least the blue chips, right? So for example, Space Buds, Claymates, the Ape Society, these are all projects, and
I
of
think
course, Cornucopias.
Space Buds was like the first NFT on Cardano or something like that.
That is correct. That was the first NFT collection launched by Alessandro, who's actually moved on
He
from
made
the Cardano community.
He made 10,000 of them at the beginning, and I think at the beginning of the smart contracts when it was just starting up.
Yep, that is correct. And so I tend to keep up with them. Again, there's so many of them. It's hard to keep up with everything. But with some of the bigger ones, especially the ones that I've been able to meet the founders or the teams in person at, for example, Rare Evo, the Cardano Summit, et cetera, it's a little bit easier to keep up with them again because I've had a relationship with them. So I would say the space moves very quickly, but a lot of my content tends to focus on some of the more nuanced protocols, not necessarily NFT spaces, even though some of the protocols that I do cover have NFT collections of their own.
So what would you say? Okay, so if we focus on like the mainstay infrastructure, let's say for example the DeFi market on Cardano, what would you say is the leading one? Like for example for Ethereum, it's Uniswap or maybe some others like 1inch. But for the Cardano, what is the leading NFT marketplace? I'm sorry, not NFT, like the leading DeFi, like for example for the swaps.
Yeah, I would have to say right now it has to be Indigo. So their synthetics platform. So for example, anybody who wants to get access to Bitcoin, Ethereum, or even the US dollar in a stable coin, right? They're able to do that using the Indigo protocol. So right now, Indigo leads the Cardano ecosystem with the majority of the TVL, over $100 million in terms of TVL, followed by MinSwap. So Indigo is, I would say,
is that locked value in like the liquidity pools or
no. So whenever you go into Mint, for example, a synthetic asset, you have to put up collateral, right? So that collateral is actually locked. So it's not necessarily a swapping protocol. However, I can talk a little bit about that as well. So Indigo focuses strictly on putting down collateral in order to mint a asset that isn't necessarily representative or native to Cardano. So that's where their TVL comes in, is in the collateralized debt positions. Now, to touch on the equivalent of Uniswap, we have something, for example, like MinSwap on Cardano, right? They're the number one DEX where you're able to take your ADA, you can swap that over into the Min token, the Cornucopias token, the Indigo token, any token that's native to Cardano. You can use MinSwap to go ahead and swap for that. Now, their TVL is made up of liquidity pools, right? Where somebody can come in, provide liquidity to the protocol, and basically earn the inflation, right, from the Min token or the MinSwap DEX, in addition to other tokens for whatever pool that they provided liquidity for. So, for example, Cornucopias is an NFT platform, or I should say, is a gaming platform that's building on Cardano. They've got their own Cornucopias token or the Copi token. And if you want to go ahead and provide liquidity using MinSwap, you can go ahead and do that, where you earn the Copi token, the MinSwap token. And in some instances, you can even earn ADA as well.
Perfect. So what would you say is the leading, let's say, token on the Cardano, like this layer two? Like, for example, we have like in some, like, let's say, for example, is it also the stable coins like USDT, or is it something else?
Right now, we just got USDM. And to be fully fair here, Cardano is the layer one, but I think what you're referring to are the dApps. So Cardano doesn't have a layer two in the sense, for example, that Ethereum has Polygon built on top of it. However, we are working on a partner chain model, which will allow for Cardano to connect and interact with other blockchains, for example, like Midnight. So you may have heard of Midnight. It's a data privacy blockchain, which IOG, which is also developing Cardano, is working to develop as well. But to go back and to answer your question, I would say leading tokens right now with the AI narrative kind of popping up, there's been AGIX, Singularity Net. They're an AI platform or an AI marketplace, and their token has gained a lot of attraction. They just announced that they're going to be merging with two other AI tokens outside of Cardano and creating a single token. So I think that's going to really, really bring in a lot of liquidity, not just to Cardano, but into all the other ecosystems that those tokens are held on. In addition, I would have to say Cornucopias. So I mentioned Cornucopias earlier. They are building a blockchain-based game, right? But it's essentially a metaverse where you're able to roam around, participate in different activities, etc. And I would say their community has to be one of the strongest, which is probably why their token is appreciated a lot. But as you're probably also aware, there's been a pretty big gaming narrative, right? So during the last bull market, there was Gala Games, a game studio, and their token went from about 2 or 3 cents all the way to about $1. And so I think we're going to see a very similar narrative kind of beginning to pop up here. I think that is very as a front runner when it comes to the gaming space. Very lastly, there is, let's say here, USDM that just launched as a stable coin. We don't necessarily have the liquidity that USDC or USDT, excuse me, and USDC have. However, I would say that over the course of time, as the ecosystem matures, more liquidity comes in, we would hope to get as much liquidity with USDM as we have with something like USDC. I think that's really kind of it. I do want to maybe touch on one ecosystem that I haven't touched on yet, which is the meme coin space. So if you are not familiar with meme coins, outside of Cardano, there's, for example, Doge. There's also, for example, something like Floki, Pepe on Ethereum. On Cardano, we've got SNEC, and they are one of the most heavily traded tokens here. So when we're talking about tokens, I cannot go without mentioning SNEC, which I think has been a huge leader here when it comes to bringing people into Cardano, but then also getting a lot of volume in trading.
And do you see like the trends for these tokens? Are they more like, obviously ADA is like also like a token on the Cardano blockchain, and it's the main one, and it's limited supply. Does other tokens tend to like, if you look at the majority, are they limited also in supply or unlimited and inflation?
Yeah. I mean, I would say 99% of the tokens that I've seen, very rarely do they have an uncapped supply. I think that introduces a lot of room for issues, but then just even as an investor, hearing about a token that has an uncapped supply for me would definitely turn me off, right? I would not want to invest in something that I know doesn't have a hard set supply. Because again, who's minting it? When are they minting it? What's stopping them from doubling the supply overnight while I'm sleeping? Et cetera. So the majority of tokens that I see do have a hard cap. And for example, with something like SNEC, we saw a really interesting mechanism where the team had a pre-sale and they distributed, 90% or around that amount. Again, don't quote me here, but the majority of the tokens were distributed fairly to the community, right? So it wasn't something where the team had launched it and said, hey, we're going to keep a lot of the tokens. They were just like, hey, we just want to get this out there. And it grew organically. So I would like to see a little bit more of that. But as it stands right now, I'd say the majority of tokens in the ecosystem are hard capped.
Perfect. I think I agree with you. Like, especially like I have like already this red flags whenever see anything that's unlimited, but even like something as big as Ethereum. But even more so after the Luna fiasco, I mean, it's like a hard no for me for anything that's uncapped. So yeah, one of the best things that I liked about Cardano when it initially started is like being this having a cap is very nice. So
This episode is sponsored by DegreeSign.
CoinExams platform was purpose-built by DegreeSign to be one of the best-performing platforms in the crypto space.
DegreeSign is an agency developing web products with a long experience of building products from scratch for maximum performance and stability.
Start today. Just email make@degreesign.com.
moving on to other like the larger ecosystem in the crypto space, what other blockchains do you see like that can work maybe with Cardano or like through bridges or whatnot, or maybe like that has also like also offers some different value or like solve some other problems?
So I would say other ecosystems or other networks that seem to align very closely with Cardano include Algorand and Ergo. They're very small in terms of community, somewhat kind of like Cardano, but the way that they've built out and the way that they've marketed themselves has been very similar to Cardano. So taking, again, a much more rigorous approach to launching and building out the infrastructure. So I would definitely say both of those two ecosystems or networks. When it comes to Ergo, we have a bridge that just went live, the Rosen Bridge, not too long ago, which allows for tokens on Cardano to be migrated over and wrapped into the Ergo ecosystem, and then vice versa, where you can take your tokens from Ergo, wrap those, and then bring them over into Cardano. So there's already been a relationship established. When it comes to Ergo, I would love to see something like that being done with Algorand as well. And then maybe just more broadly speaking, Avalanche has kind of caught my eye, and so has Polygon, right? So these are two EVM-based networks which have gathered a lot of eyeballs and a lot of traction, really coming out and only having a single cycle versus Cardano, which has already had its second cycle, now going on its third cycle, right? So these are a lot newer, yet they've gathered a lot of attention, a lot of partnerships. So I think that branching out into those ecosystems could present a huge opportunity and bring a lot of credibility to Cardano as well.
I think especially for Algorand, as you mentioned, like there is a lot of synergies because it was also based on like research based. So it's like very strong fundamentals. So yeah, and it's like at least they have a plan for that decentralization as well, but maybe not as strong as Cardano's. But yeah, it's a very interesting project as well. So how about for the bigger projects like, for example, Ethereum or Bitcoin? Do you see this like as obviously you can see that Bitcoin has like some diminishing dominance in the market. So right now I think it's around 50%. And each cycle we're seeing it like less and less as a share of the whole market. Do you think that Cardano maybe can fill in this over the long run, especially as the improvements come in and as the master plan like is being fulfilled?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I definitely think so, right? So Cardano's taken a very similar approach to the account model that Bitcoin has, right? With the UTXO model, Cardano's added smart contract capabilities on top of that, which makes it a lot more flexible, very similar to how Ethereum introduced smart contracts as well, right? So I think Cardano is very well positioned, somewhat as the like offspring of Bitcoin. And I think that moving forward, if Cardano is able to continue to deliver the way that it has, granted, I would love to see faster developments, just being honest, that it can begin to take more and more of the market share. I think it's inevitable, right? People are coming into the space. They find out about Bitcoin. There are some drawbacks to Bitcoin. However, that's where the majority liquidity is. But as investors, people are looking for the next opportunity, right? So in order to find the next opportunity, you have to stray away from Bitcoin, which is why I think we've seen the dominance continuing to fall. Even though right now it's at 50, I think that, over the course of the next bull run, going into the next cycle, might be at, 30, 20%, as more people diversify into altcoins looking to, number one, make gains, but the number two, keep up with the technology, right? Because there's going to be new blockchains that come out that are going to do things better than Bitcoin, better than Ethereum, and even better than Cardano. Like we're at the very early stages. An analogy I like to use is you take a look at vehicles or cars. You know, you take a look at the Model T 100 years ago, and you try to explain to somebody 100 years ago what a Tesla is now, they wouldn't be able to understand a car that can drive itself, a car that uses electricity instead of, you know, a traditional combustion engine running off of gas, right? So I think it's going to be the same exact thing with crypto. Right now, all we know about is Bitcoin, Cardano, Ethereum, Avalanche, Polygon, etc. Imagine 100 years from now, where we've had time for trial and error to take place, where we've had time to create new blockchains that are able to do everything that we have now, plus 100 other things. So I think it's inevitable. We're going to see the liquidity drain out of Bitcoin, but kudos to anybody who was able to get into Bitcoin, right, to have that vision, because again, it was like the pioneer, right? Without Bitcoin, we wouldn't have everything else that we have now. But I think that as things mature, we do have to diversify and invest in new opportunities.
Okay, I agree with you wholeheartedly, like that technology has to evolve always. But for example, for Bitcoin, a lot of especially the maximalists, they would say that you are correct if this is just like pure technology, but it also has like this element of value that's attached to Bitcoin. You know already for sure like about the Bitcoin as like a digital gold narrative. So you think that this is something that can be shared maybe with something like Cardano, having like limited supply and even following the same protocols for the transaction as you mentioned, which is like much more thorough compared to the EVM maybe. So do you think that this may be a status that, let's say, for example, is going to be like the silver or something like actually like something that people look forward to for savings, or it's not going to reach this status, it's just going to focus on other solution or like other problems to solve in the space?
No, I think it can definitely be that. I mean, Bitcoin, I think the reason why it's called the gold, right, is because of its deflationary model. But there's plenty of other networks that have a deflationary tokenomic system, right? Cardano being one of those as well. There's a hard cap of 45 billion ADA that can never be in circulation, right? Right now we're at about 35 billion, meaning there's still about 10 billion, right? So if you stake to a Cardano stake pool and your delegators, or excuse me, your stake pool operator mints a block, he gets a reward, but then so do the delegators, right? So that's what is incentivizing people to stake and to delegate to keep the Cardano network running. But that's going to continue to diminish as more and more of the supply comes out into the ecosystem, right? But there's going to be a point where all those tokens are finite. And if Cardano is able to continue to build and provide more value and utility, we're going to see more demand than there is supply coming out, right? Especially once all the tokens are in circulation. Now you have a hard cap where there's no more new tokens being created, but there's going to be increase in demand if Cardano is able to provide value for people to say, hey, I actually want to trade my dollars in for ADA. Just like right now, we're seeing a supply shock for Bitcoin, where again, there's the halving, right? 900 Bitcoins every day right now. That's going to become 450 Bitcoins every day. But if we're seeing more people trying to swap their dollars into Bitcoin, that's what drives the price higher, right? So as long as the tokenomics are there, I think that there's other networks that can essentially be that digital gold. Even though Bitcoin was, again, the first one to lead the space, I think the opportunity is open for a plethora of other blockchains to also kind of follow suit and provide utility. That's the biggest thing, I think, is providing utility. And if the tokenomics are right, inevitably or eventually there will be some sort of a supply shock.
Okay, but there is one disadvantage also for having this demand increase, which we can see in Bitcoin and even though also in Ethereum, is the fees. Like the fees tend to increase especially as you mentioned, like if the supply dries up, validators will have to somehow like sustain the operations by maybe increasing the fees or proposing some changes to the protocols. So you think that this might be a risk for ADA, like in the future, as it is a risk already for Bitcoin?
Actually not. And the reason why I say that is because of governance again, right? So once governance comes out, the community can vote if they want to increase or decrease the fees that the network takes whenever a transaction is being made, right? Another interesting concept too, which I've seen done with another project, is splitting off the incentivization for higher fees by providing other reward mechanisms other than just by producing or validating blocks, right? So I think there's a couple of ways to go about it, but I think again, that one thing that sets Cardano apart is the governance aspect. So if the community votes to increase the fees, they could. If they want to decrease it, they could as well. Interestingly enough, we saw a DEX who actually just recently decreased their fees based off of how big of a swap based off how big of a swap you're making on their platform, right? So these are forward-thinking projects because, again, as the bull market comes along, the value of ADA becomes more. So back in the day when it was 24 cents and you're making a swap, you didn't mind paying a half of an ADA for a fee, right? Because that's only 12 cents. Well, when Cardano's $10 and you're paying half of an ADA, that's $5. Now it's like, okay, well, that's actually a lot. I can maybe put that $5 and get more tokens if the fee was lower, right? So I think that we need some sort of dynamic fee model. And again, governance will allow for the Cardano community to kind of guide that conversation as it comes along. But then also keep in mind that there is a treasury set aside, right? So thinking about new ways to use the funds in the treasury, not saying that it has to go back to SPOs, but this just opens up more opportunity for the Cardano community to kind of put their heads together and figure out, okay, in the long term, how can we use the treasury and how can we use governance to make sure that the ecosystem scales properly as the Cardano token also becomes more valuable.
Perfect. I think that sums it up well. Yeah, hopefully because of this unique, or like at least a very special way of governance for Cardano. Like a lot of projects have this aspirations, but it looks like Cardano is the only one who is like methodically executing on these goals. So yeah, hopefully I think it will improve because yeah, honestly, the fees and also the delays, if they can like speed up all these things and make it much more cheaper, then it can be more competitive. Like as you mentioned, like Algorand, you can see the huge different discrepancy in the fees between the Algorand and Cardano. So, but obviously Cardano is much more rich. The ecosystem is much more, the community is much more flourishing and have a lot more projects. So yeah, I think Cardano have like a huge potential. So yeah, hopefully this new era is like Voltaire, right? As you mentioned. So hopefully it's like gives like this extra flourishing for Cardano. And yeah, thank you so much for the overview. Is there any way for people to get in touch with you other than the YouTube channel?
I can provide you my email. I usually keep that for business inquiries, but from time to time, whenever I do have the opportunity, I jump in there and try to respond to as many people as I can. But short of YouTube, I am on Twitter as well. So it's at DappCentral. Again, I'll pass it over to you if you want to leave those in the show notes, where I try to just really keep everybody up to date when it comes to everything Cardano. But I would say my main focus is YouTube. I see the most value coming from there. And it's also what I've kind of practiced the most. So I'm very sort of fluid when it comes to getting the content out there. I try to keep my community updated with content at least once per day. But that's probably the easiest ways to get in touch with me, either on YouTube, either on Twitter, or either via email. I also do have my own website where I break everything down, and it's got some helpful resources there. So those are a couple of ways you can get in touch with me.
Perfect. I'll have all this in the video notes. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. I appreciate the opportunity.